I could not stop overthinking about work after work hours, even though I am not a workaholic. Anybody overcome this successfully? Tip 1. I have found that having an activity after work that helps decompressing, like lifting weights or running, going for a walk, listening to an interesting podcast outside your line. If work helps set a barrier between work and what comes next. Weightlifting is the most useful thing for me as it takes my focus and relieves aggression from the day. But I understand it's not for everyone. Another useful thing I found is to write a quick reminder in your phone for things that pop into my head about work that I need to do. It may sound counterintuitive, but once you write it down, you can rest better knowing you don't have to remember it for the next day. Tip number 2. I have noticed that setting clear boundaries helped. For example, I would set specific locations that I would do my work in, such as the office, library, or coffee shop. Everywhere else, I would barely think about work because I already detached myself from it by leaving the location. Do you work from home? There could be an issue with you feeling like you have no constantly to be working. It's common for people who work from home. If you can, you could separate your working space from your living space at home. Tip number 3. I find that I tend to think about work more when I'm bored and want to feel productive. Try to find something occupy your time with. Explore some hobbies, see a movie, take a walk in the park, etc. It's okay to be not productive all the time. I try to think of my house outside of work as time I have earned to relax. Tip number 4. I hate to suggest this because it's become such a catch-all, but improving mindfulness could be helpful. The more you recognize when your attention has drifted, the easier it will be to focus on being present. But if you are on the obsessive side like I am, then it will take a lot of repetitions and gentle attention to recentering moments. Another thing that helps me a lot is designating a set amount of time after work to think about work. And then when the time runs up, I try to stop. However, it will inevitably pop back up in my head, but I just remind myself that I can think about it tomorrow. Again, this is a rinse and repeat process. Over 6 to 8 months, you will see a nice improvement if you are disciplined with your attention to awareness and mindfulness. At least that's about how long it took for me to notice differences. Tip number 5. I went through this during COVID when we were understaffed. Our IT team has 4 managing 600 users at work. I felt like I was pushed above my limits of working 100% to like 450%. After my 8-hour shift, I could not turn my brain off. I was constantly thinking about work, dreaming about work, and complaining about work. I was consumed by work. I ended up getting a therapist and expressing how I felt. The therapist was able to help me ease my mind and help me see that I was working too hard and needed to spend time doing things that I liked. I started doing things like going on walks during my 15-minute breaks, going to the gym, treating myself to my favorite desserts or snacks, playing my favorite video games, etc. It was hard to mentally tell myself I could slow down, but after a while I was able to slow down and start doing the things I liked. Thankfully, our company hired 5 more people for our team and made things a bit better. Tip number 6. I have given up trying to separate work from my private life because work I love tends to absorb me too much. Instead, I go with the flow. I work when I feel like it and take breaks when things are finished, and I can get back to my work out of my head more easily. Luckily, my job as a teacher is very suitable for this, as it doesn't matter when I do my preparations as long as I'm present for my classes. When I was still in an academic scientific researcher, this was much harder because there's an unspoken expectation of working a 9 to 5 or at least being present in office full time. And that didn't suit my natural work schedule of intense working days followed by crash days. For context, my need for a strange work rhythm is caused by ADHD plus ASD. Basically, I can't choose when I'm able to concentrate well on my work, so it's better for me to adapt to my natural work rhythm, even when medicated, even If I don't do that, my productivity drops quite dramatically. Tip number 7. To break an unwanted train of thought, a few steps. Recognize you are doing it. Second, imagine a stop sign. Third, perform a chain-breaking activity in your head, such as attempting the pledge of allegiance backwards or some long division. 4. Once the train of thought is broken, busy yourself with an activity or other thought. Your brain probably drifted back to that thought. So repeat step 1, it becomes easier every time. So the unwanted thought eventually fades away. Tip number 8. With a previous job, I had this issue. Once I realized I had been doing it every time I found myself thinking about work outside of work, I would tell myself to stop. Sometimes telling myself once was enough. Sometimes I'd have to repeatedly tell myself to stop because my thoughts would drift back to work. It helped me to distract myself with TV or a hobby. It is not an overnight fix. It took me a while to really get into work. It took me a while to really get to a point where I was not constantly thinking of work. Tip number 8. I think I suffer from the same problem. I have not managed to solve it and it still frustrates me about this is what helps me at the moment. 1. Have a document for work stuff which you can write down all your worries, all your ideas and everything you feel you have to do. This helps a lot to unload the mind and moves to worry of doing something to do an actual plan. For larger projects, have dedicated documents in which you do your investigations, brainstorm ideas and list to-do items. For me, it's very difficult to being around colleagues soothes me and helps me take my mind off work. 3. Have a fair separation between the working hours and your personal life. Here are some tips. Block time in your calendar for the lunch break. Community helps a lot to change your mindset. Set a clear schedule every day when you should finish work. No matter what happens, add reminder in your calendar. 4. Sometimes I keep thinking about if I feel procrastinate a lot. Find some time during the day in which you can focus to get something important done. Person 5. Sports help you a lot for me. Working out in the gym clears my mind, but find whatever works for you. Hope this helps. Tip number 9. I have anxiety and ADHD. You are describing rumination. There are many different tips out there for limiting rumination. The number 1 is probably cognitive behaviors. Cognitive behavioral therapy. You have also tried. 2. Creating an after work routine to help delineate the transition to work non-work life. 2. Write down the thoughts, help your brain to stop cycling through them. 3. Mindfulness meditation can be a form of CBT, helps you manage thinking. 4. Go for a walk when you can't shake the thoughts. Helps you to get outside your head when there's a lot going on internally. Tip number 10. This sounds a lot like me. I hate unsolved problems and they will definitely occupy my brain long after my workday is over, if I let them, and sometimes I do. If I don't have anything else that I need to be going, then I don't see any problem letting my brain get a head start on the problems I knew I'll be facing tomorrow. I rather enjoy solved problems, so I don't see this as a violation of work-life balance. It doesn't actually interfere with my life. If I do have something else I need to be doing, then I shift my focus to that. More often than not, that's enough to get the problem out of my head. But on the rare occasions where my brain just doesn't want to let it go, I will just give in and work through it. I found it's better to do an extra hour or 2 of work and be done with it than to let the problem ruin my entire evening and the night. The other thing I also do is trying to make sure I am not starting my new big problems near the end of the day. In fact, I like to end my days at a point where my current problems is not quite finished, but I know exactly what work is remaining, so it's easy to pick up again. The next morning, kinda like pausing a TV show in the middle of an episode. When needing to go to bed or avoid cliffhangers at the end, that compel me to keep watching until 3 a.m. Tip number 11. Have a ritual as you either leave work or enter home. Some of it's purely practical for me. Work bag off, work keys away. If I have had a particularly long day, I am a teacher. I will stop at the front door and imagine work sloughing off my shoulders. A big part of this is not taking work home. If I have something that needs to be done urgently, I try to complete it before I leave. Or I do it always as soon as possible at home. Knowing something is done helps a lot to get it out of mind. I don't always like work itself because people annoy me, but my job is scientific and I read science and science fiction is in my free time. Therefore, work pops into my head. However, I do not allow myself to ruminate over impending work problems, and when I tempted, I think of my success like when was the first time I avoided a bad outcome with my knowledge or hit a sales goal. I get so full of myself, I move on to another happy task while like going down an ancient homemade rabbit hole. This leads to a YouTube bing that ends me with sleep and well rested for the next day. It's important to note that if you fall asleep during your YouTube videos, make sure you have happy or interesting things and don't include murder or otherwise the background sound contribute to the nightmares. Tip number 13. I used to do this until it was made very clear my work was not appreciated, so now it's just not my problem. Brought in someone external for the role. I was promised and now everything is burning down and people are raising grievances against him, but it's not my problem. Unless you're getting paid for it, you are actually going to be rewarded for it. Just do your job well, you are at work and leave it until the next day. Tip number 14. I got to grips with this kind of thing in a number of ways, focusing on the fact that I was not getting paid for the extra hours, focusing on the things I was not doing, hobbies, family time, physically separating my work life and personal life, changing my clothes as soon as I finished work. That seemed to be a powerful sign that my brain needed to say, the workday is over. Needless to say, never check emails, etc. once you are done. Tip number 15. Here is how I deal with this. Take lunches outside of work. If you are close to your park, then take your lunches there. 2. Don't check work email at home. Number 3. Show up and leave on time. 4. If working holidays are optional, then never work on a holiday. 5. Make sure to use your paid time off. Sometimes you have to use this strategically to help break up. Step 5. Have things outside of work that helps to occupy your mind, especially when things are getting really stressful. Investing in hobbies, hanging out with friends. Number 6. Have an outlet to vent about work.